And more major cabinet picks coming out of Palm Beach, where President-elect Donald Trump has selected Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to run the Department of Health and Human Services. Trump calls that position the most important role in his administration. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao, who is in West Palm Beach. Good evening, Iris. So what is the latest in Trump's transition efforts from there?
Good evening to you as well, Steve. So President-elect Trump, who continues to be in here in West Palm Beach, on Thursday announced that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would be his pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. And that's a sprawling agency administering health insurance for millions of Americans, approving different kinds of drugs, regulating food, and responding to outbreaks of infectious diseases.
And he's going to help make America healthy again.
In a statement, Trump says Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception and misinformation. He adds that the department under Kennedy will play a big role in helping ensure that everybody will be protected from harmful chemicals, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to the overwhelming health crisis in this country. Trump has repeatedly indicated on the campaign trail that Kennedy, the third-party candidate who dropped out to endorse him in August, will be in charge of health policy in his future administration.
Robert F. Kennedy cares more about human beings and health and the environment than anybody. Let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines.
Kennedy has voiced skepticism towards certain vaccines and has vowed to target causes of chronic disease and childhood illness. He attributes his support for Trump to a common goal of ending censorship and making America healthy again.
You want a president who's going to get the corruption out of Washington, D.C. And don't we deserve a president of the United States that's going to make America healthy again?
Meanwhile, Kennedy responded tonight, vowing to clean up corruption and return health agencies to what he calls the rich tradition of evidence-based science. Steve.
So, Iris, President-elect Trump also rolling out several fresh appointments tonight on top of RFK Jr. Tell us more.
Sure. So Trump tonight also announced that he's tapping former Georgia Congressman Doug Collins as his pick to lead the Department of Veteran Affairs. And Trump is highlighting Collins' experience as a veteran himself, including we know that Collins has served in Iraq in 2008 and still serves in the reserve. He's also served in the Navy for 2 years and also re-enlisted himself in the Air Force Reserve after the September 11 attacks. In a statement tonight, Trump says we must take care of our brave men and women in uniform, and Doug will be a great advocate for our active duty service members, veterans, and military families to ensure they have the support they need. In addition, Trump tonight also announced that he's tapping his lawyer Todd Blanche as the Deputy Attorney General, which is number 2 lawyer at the Justice Department. Trump also announced that he's choosing John Sauer, his lawyer who argued his immunity case in front of Supreme Court, to be the U.S. Solicitor General, and that's the position who would argue the government's cases in front of the highest court. Steve.
NTD's Iris Tao live from West Palm Beach. Thank you, Iris. So how will President-elect Trump's new Justice Department carry out his mass deportation policy? And can the DOJ restore law and order to American cities where certain crimes are not being prosecuted? Joining me now to discuss what Trump's new Justice Department might look like is Jeff Clark, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General in 2 prior administrations. Jeff Clark, thank you so much for joining.
Always good to be here, Steve.
It's great to have you back, Jeff. So when it comes to illegal immigration, obviously this arguably was the biggest issue for Americans when they hit the polls this election cycle. How should the Department of Justice support President-elect Trump's policies when it comes to securing the border, and specifically when it comes to mass deportations of illegal immigrants?
So, Steve, look, there are really 3 to 4 major areas of the federal government that would be involved. There's the Justice Department, there's the Department of Homeland Security, and there is the State Department in terms of relations with Mexico and other countries to which the individuals might be returned directly. And then there's, a military support role in securing the border and reflecting people who are trying to illegally cross in between ports of entry to reflect them back into Mexico. So let me just cover one of the tools that the president has stressed that he's interested in using, which is the Alien Enemies Act. So the Alien Enemies Act, it's centuries old at this point. It's a well-established tool. It's been used in our history, in a number of different junctures, and it gives the president the unilateral power if you're facing either a declared war, that would not be the case here, or a predatory incursion. And I think from the Mexican cartels and from the sort of quasi-state nature of the Tren de Aragua gang from Venezuela, they're almost like irregular forces and disruptors of the Venezuelan government. They qualify as predatory, incursionists, and for that reason the statute can be invoked against them, and they can just be deported if they're engaged in, if they pose a threat to the public safety and health and welfare, and they do. That can be carried out under the statute by the marshals, and the marshals are inside the Justice Department. So as to those who are not violent, there's a reasonable period of time that the president, by proclamation under the statute, needs to give them to wrap up their affairs, like sell their property, contact where they're going to be moving to outside of the country, et cetera, and make those arrangements. But for those who are violent, the highest priority people to deport, or who are criminals in other respects, property crimes and the like, they can just be scooped up by the Marshal Service and removed from the country.
And Jeff, when it comes to considering the president's mandate to restore law and order in the United States, what specific steps should the Department of Justice take to address, say, mob violence and, reform prosecutorial practices in American cities?
I think that something like a task force should be set up, working with the Criminal Division and the U.S. Attorney's offices, which are supervised by the Deputy Attorney General, to identify those, largely blue areas where the criminal laws are going unenforced or under-enforced. Ridiculous things like in San Francisco where, there's a certain limit of value that if you steal that, you're not going to be prosecuted locally. And identify those jurisdictions that are not enforcing the criminal laws to benefit the citizens of the United States who live there, even though they're also citizens of the local community, citizens of the state of California and other places, and focus on using federal resources then to prosecute the crimes that can be prosecuted against those individuals, so that you can get control again over those areas, that they're not essentially lawless. And the other tool that the Justice Department has is there's an entire set of grant programs that are run by the Office of Justice Programs, and essentially we could incentivize them to do the right thing by essentially saying, look, if you're not going to enforce your criminal laws, are going to ignore entire categories of crime, then you're not going to get your grants.
Jeff, you've been very outspoken about the nonviolent January 6th, what some might call political prisoners. Those who attended the rally got kind of scooped up in the mix and were not violent with the Capitol Police. President Trump has criticized the Department of Justice for what he calls persecution of political opponents. How should the DOJ, the new DOJ, address these concerns to maintain its integrity and impartiality?
So the president has indicated that he's interested in looking at pardons for those who were scooped up in what, fantastically is the largest law enforcement operation in U.S. history, all over a couple-hour riot on one day, Meanwhile, in the summer that led up to January 6th, the summer of 2020, there were multiple cities burning. There were people being killed. There's a federal courthouse that I was particularly involved in efforts to try to protect out in Portland, Oregon, that was being attacked night after night for a month. And all of these people basically either got no prosecutions or they got off with a slap on the wrist. What is it about those who came to January 6th? And the answer really is that they're an identifiable populist conservative group of people, and I think it was clearly a weaponized political operation. So I think President Trump's going to look at the pardons. It's going to be interesting whether he decides that he wants to kind of pull that up into the White House apparatus, because the power is his. It's only his. It's not given to an institution. It's given to him as the president. But there is an office that's been established to help assist the president, usually with a mine run kind of criminal case, right, where it might have like a long course of litigation history and might have habeas proceedings that need to be reviewed, like a big factual record, et cetera. And so the Office of the Pardon Attorney inside the Justice Department would typically look at those. But here, I think we're talking about something that's like a bigger categorical problem. And in order to kind of cut the Gordian knot on that, the president might decide to handle it without the pardon attorney. I mean, all that's going to be up to him in the future, and I'm sure he's looking at different options that are being put before him about that.
And obviously, right now, causing quite a stir in the mainstream media, former now Congressman Matt Gaetz just resigning, appointed to be the next Attorney General. Do you think that he is going to be a good choice to carry out President Trump's policy?
I think he's a tremendous choice. I think he's an inspired choice. And, it's interesting you mentioned him right after you mentioned the whole issue of the J6ers. He's the only member of Congress who held a field hearing about their plight. And I was pleased to testify at it and point out all of the due process problems and other legal problems, such as the fact that many of them were scooped up by what I regard as an unconstitutional general warrant that violates the Fourth Amendment, through kind of having a surveillance grid of phones that were in a certain proximity to the Capitol, and that it is clear that Congressman Gaetz, and I believe he will be put in place as the Attorney General, whether by confirmation by the Senate or by recess appointment. I think he has a heart for those people, and that was clear at the field hearing that he chaired.
Jeff Clark, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
And later we'll take a look at what Democratic cities and states are doing to prepare for a new President Trump and counter his plans. But first, President Biden is heading to South America for a 6-day trip to meet world leaders. He'll be meeting with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, and NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the White House.
President Biden's in Peru attending the APEC summit, but while he's there, he'll be meeting Chinese leader Xi Jinping on the sidelines in Lima. Now, this is significant because it's the third and final time that Biden and Xi will be meeting since Biden became president. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was asked about America's greatest adversary as we transition into a new administration. He mentioned China and that the incoming administration is clear on this.
Well, the competition with the People's Republic of China is going to be defining for what the world looks like over the course of the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And so that has got to be a paramount priority for the incoming administration. And the person who's been named as my successor, the person who's been floated as the Secretary of State, these are people who have very much focused on that challenge.
He also said that a transition could have unique consequences around the world.
There are times when competitors and adversaries can see possibly opportunity. Because you have this change in government here, we have to sustain over the long term the channels of communication at every level, particularly the military to military level.
We know President-elect Donald Trump has billed himself, as well as his incoming administration, as being tough on China. Now, he's mentioned putting a 60% tariff on all Chinese goods. And back in 2021, when he left office, him and Xi Jinping were not on such good terms, as the Chinese regime attempted to cover up the outbreak of the COVID pandemic for weeks before telling anyone, and even tried to put the blame on the U.S. As for Biden and Xi Jinping's upcoming meeting, they've repeatedly discussed many topics in the past, so these might be repeated this time, like the Chinese Communist Party's aggression in the Indo-Pacific, fentanyl manufacturing, and the shocking human rights abuses coming out of China. A U.S. State Department report in June details the CCP's practice of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. The main target has been practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation practice with moral principles. For over 25 years, Falun Gong has been persecuted by the Chinese regime because of its popularity and spiritual beliefs. After his meeting with Xi and finishing up at APEC in Peru, President Biden will head to Brazil for the G20 summit. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.